Hello, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be invited here to speak to you today as you embark on this new and exciting adventure through the traditional arts and crafts. Now, in many ways, you're standing on the precipice of a new era of learning in consideration of the fact that nobody has ever studied Islamic art via Zoom before. Now, of course, the idea of digital learning yields a tremendous amount of benefits, especially in a context of quarantining and, of course, overpriced PCR tests. But nevertheless, I can sympathize with those amongst you who feel that they are missing out somewhat on being in the presence of a traditional master of Islamic art. It becomes a lot easier, I suppose, to establish a connection with Islamic art when one is enmeshed in the cosmos of calligraphy, when one is enmeshed in the habitus, if you will, of learning. When one is in Istanbul, for example, and one walks into a studio of learning, it becomes a lot easier to dedicate oneself to a particular craft when you are able to witness the camaraderie and mutual support and healthy competition between the students, when you're able to see the hushed tones of the students in deference to their masters, when one is able to see, perhaps most importantly, the hierarchies of knowledge that are immediately established in the classroom environment between the masters and their disciples. And so I can imagine that when one is learning through the digital format, that one can feel slightly detached, perhaps, or displaced at moments between themselves and the art form that they're studying, between themselves and the teacher. And one has to keep in mind that traditional art, especially Islamic calligraphy and especially Islamic illumination, they demand so much, not only in terms of technical skill and ability, extremely difficult, but they also demand a certain amount of moral force from us, right, in order to complete a particular journey in Islamic craft. And the idea of morality and character playing a significant role in the arts and crafts is perhaps more understandable when we can begin to look at the origins and the meanings that have been attributed to traditional craft in their original context. So I thought perhaps I'll just spend the remainder, just a couple minutes, kind of going through some of the interesting ways in which Islamic calligraphy and illumination have been conceptualized by chroniclers from the Islamic period, from the Muslim world. So why is calligraphy and illumination so important? Why is the pursuit of these particular arts and crafts considered to be a form of worship? Well, in many ways, calligraphy and illumination are inseparable from the Quran, as inseparable as they are from the religion of Islam. So the primary purpose, the primary motivating factor for the development of calligraphy and illumination is to glorify the words of God. For Muslims, the Quran is the literal word of God. The Quran is God revealing the knowledge of himself to mankind. And one can imagine this very early Muslim community, this nascent and emerging Muslim community, really grappling with this quandary of how does one transcribe the eternal? And we can see in response that they developed a script and a style of writing and a style of illumination that was really commensurate with the task of glorifying the words of God. Now, of course, Islamic calligraphy and illumination was prolific, it was enduring, it flourished over 1,000 years and adapted to local flavors and to local contexts. And when we think about calligraphy, the impetus for this incredible development was the fact that the Quran has always remained central to Islamic society in terms of law, in terms of ethics, and in terms of ritual. And so when we think about Islamic calligraphy, one can learn so much, and illumination, one can learn so much from examining the ways in which both of these things have been conceptualized in the traditional literature. So one of the most frequent and recurring features of the literature is the quotation of certain Quranic passages. For example, Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun, Surah 68, verse 1, where, which is Noon, by the pen and what they inscribe. And a second one is, of course, from Surah Al-Alaq, alladhi allama bil qalam, right? And in both of these verses, God mentions the pen, right? In the second one, God who taught by the pen. And these two verses are often cited as proof of the divine sanctioning of scribal activity, of writing. The fact that the pen had this kind of celestial origin, it lends credence to the idea that that copying calligraphy of writing, in fact, is some kind of a reflection of a divine archetype that exists in another realm. Now, these two Quranic verses are frequently supported by hadiths. Mustaqim Zadeh's Tuhfe Hattatin, for example, The Gifts of the Calligraphers, this great 18th century biographical dictionary of calligraphers, begins with 40 hadiths in support of calligraphy. And one of the hadiths that is frequently cited is أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْقَلَمِ, right? The first thing that God created was the pen. And the hadith continues, and the pen continued to write on the sacred tablet, the Lawhin Mahfuz, and on the tablet would be written everything that would transpire from the beginning of time to the end. And so again, this is cited as a kind of reflection on the idea that something that is created by the pen is endorsed by some kind of divine authority. So for this reason, calligraphy, right? If for this reason, writing in general is considered to be sacred, and calligraphy is considered to be sacred because it is that thing which elevates writing, right? It's that thing which transmutes writing to a higher chain in the great hierarchy of being by beautifying it. And this is especially relevant in the context of the Quran, hadiths, prayer books, and other things of that nature. One is ennobling the writing, which is already noble in and of itself, but one is ennobling that sacred writing by making it beautiful. And this is the ultimate goal, this is the ultimate intention of calligraphers and of illumination and of illuminators. Illumination being that kind of art form which is dedicated to supporting and glorifying this central calligraphic text. So in the journey, in your journeys of learning, I think there are many difficulties and many great things that you will encounter. And I'm certainly not in a place to give advice to anyone, but certainly it would be instructive to perhaps speak just from personal experience, some of the things which are perhaps relevant, especially in a digital age, which might be of use. And two things immediately come to mind. So two things which I feel may help the student of learning are to do with one, tawakkul or reliance, of course on God, but as well as on the master. And the second is perseverance. So through the journey of traditional art, one of the difficulties that one faces is being able to accept one's own limitations. So there will be plenty of moments throughout your journey of learning where you will be bitter, where you will be resentful, where you will have the whisperings, where you will say, I have not been taught properly, I have the talent, but it's not being nurtured properly. And ultimately the blame will, we're all human, the blame tends never to fall on us, and it tends to fall on outside forces. And one of the strange things that you will encounter when you're learning is you will try to reproduce something, whether that's in calligraphy or illumination. The teacher will give you a prototype and you will try to replicate that image, and you will spend a week doing so. And then by the end of the week, you'll probably think that I have been successful in doing so. And then the teacher will see it and make a number of corrections, and you won't be able to understand it. You will look at those things and you think, there's no way that mine is different from the teacher's. Why am I being asked to repeat this exercise? Why is mine wrong? Why is his correct? Why is his or her correct? And one has to have reliance on the teacher in that moment, because I can promise you that maybe an hour or two later, you will notice a gulf, a chasm of differences between your writing and that of the teacher's. One has to accept that the teacher is assimilated into this great genealogy of learning, a great spiritual genealogy of learning that goes back to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and sometimes to figures and religious dignitaries before him, and also a technical genealogy. He or she is an inheritor of an incredible body of knowledge that he or she is able to replicate at any given moment in time. And so one has to have reliance on the teacher in these kinds of moments. And if one has trust and one has reliance on the teacher, then that will ultimately lead to blessings and ultimately lead to an improvement in your writing. The second thing that I would recommend is, of course, perseverance. As our great teacher Hassan Chalabi says, one has to practice calligraphy 25 hours a day. There will be plenty of moments of repetition in your writing. التكرار أحسن ولو كان يستحسن, right? Repetition is better, is best, even if it is done 180 times. This is kind of a general theme that we always see that runs throughout your learning, which is the idea of repetition. And during those moments, one will, especially when one is displaced from the teacher and one is learning digitally, one will have to look inwards, right? One will have to address all of the motivating and mitigating and all of the demons that are inside, because it's a completely different way of learning compared to what we're used to, right? If for those of us that have been educated according to Western systems of pedagogy, it's a completely different way of learning. It's not necessarily about expressing yourself, but more so about conformity to a particular paradigm, to a particular tradition. And one of the ways in which one can do almost as a zikr is to kind of frequently repeat the exercises, repeat, and return. So these are two things that, again, I don't want you to feel that I'm trying to give some kind of sageful advice to anyone, but rather these are two things, these are two of the demons that I constantly grapple with, I would say, as someone that has some experience in learning the traditional arts. I would like to thank everyone once again for taking the time to listen to this old geezer bang on for 10 or so minutes. I apologize if I've gone on various tangents, but if anyone has any questions, then please feel free to contact me. I'm sure that the team at the Dean Arts Foundation will be happy to forward my contact details. I would like to pray for everyone, and I pray for everyone's success. I also pray for the organizers because it's an incredible venture and they've remained so dedicated. This really is unprecedented. And I think it's a really rewarding and ultimately fruitful endeavor. And I think it's a real honor to be a part of it. May God make everyone's journey easy. May He not make it difficult. And may your journeys end in goodness. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.